to make sure that everybody is spotlighted so we can see them. And there we go. I believe everyone is here now. Well, I have the great pleasure of introducing and moderating these three incredible women as we discuss how tech, law, and investment are used as transformation levers. For those who are new here, my name is Anuhea, and I am a junior at Stanford getting my BS in Management Science and Engineering and a Master's in Science in Sustainability Science and Practice. I am also the co-VP of the Global Entrepreneurship team on the Business Association of Stanford Entrepreneurial Students. And really, the heart of the summit is discovering ways to transform our global structures by adopting a cross-sector lens and pushing for inclusion and innovative strategies. So today on this panel, we have Miriam Rivera, who is the co-founder and managing director of Ulu Ventures, an early seed stage venture fund in Silicon Valley focused on IT startups. She is also the co-founder and co-president of Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs, an organization that seeks to strengthen Stanford's startup community by fostering relationships among entrepreneurs and alumni investors, and is also one of our co-conveners for this event. Zara is a director of business development at Planet, focusing on identifying commercial opportunities and leading strategic partnerships to support Planet's agriculture portfolio. She brings more than 10 years of experience working across both public and private sectors, including the International Finance Corporation, McKinsey, TechnoServe, and Lehman Brothers. Finally, Magdalena Aninat is the founder-director of the Center for Philanthropy and Social Investments, CEFIS, at Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, the main private university in Chile. Recognized as a leader in promoting philanthropy development in her country and Latin America, she has authored various studies on philanthropy, corporate donation strategy, impact investment, and legal framework for giving. We will have an opportunity to hear from all of our panelists before opening up the space for questions from the audience. So please ask any of your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I will open it up to Miriam, and we would love for you to share your journey and perspectives. Thank you.
So this is a journey that is kind of tying a lot of different threads together. So one, we talked about the law and how it kind of affected me in terms of my awareness of both some of the environmental issues that started with our framework of law here in the West. And one of the ways of understanding that for me was this notion that land is improved when people act on land and create economic value through acting on land. And one of the ways in which that was implemented in terms of the law was around strip mining, and how initially people were induced to turn their lands over for strip mining with the promise that it would be restored to them after that activity. And later on, the strip miners chose not to act and perform that obligation under their contracts. And they eventually ended up in court. And the courts all agreed with those strip miners that it would be a non-economic value to try to restore these lands. And, you know, my sense is, yeah, once you've destroyed something, it's very hard to actually put it back together. But unfortunately, would people have made the same decisions if it weren't for that promise? And we'll never know because the courts chose to enforce a different concept of the value of land in those cases. And so for me, that was just a really eye-opening perspective on how land works. And I've kind of come to appreciate that the law is one of the problems, if you will, in terms of trying to change how we relate to land in our country, and that has impact on people, obviously, right? Because once you strip mine certain areas, they become environmentally sensitive. There's landslides and other things that impact human beings that live in those areas. And in addition, when the Puerto Rican hurricanes happened, I sponsored kind of an intersectional group through a program called the Impact Experience to look at how not-for-profits and private sector players in Puerto Rico and some government related agencies could work together to try to increase the response in Puerto Rico, increase jobs that were hurt by the hurricanes, et cetera. And one of the things that I learned also around property law was because of the history of slavery in Puerto Rico, a lot of people did not actually have clear title to land. And so many of them were having a really hard time getting FEMA benefits because they couldn't show title, even though they may have lived in certain areas for hundreds of years, right? Slavery ended in Puerto Rico in the 1800s. And so we really have these struggles of how do people show their land ownership and be able to take advantage of government programs, et cetera. And then how do we actually have a different relationship to land? There's been a lot of development on the island of Puerto Rico, for example, and even Trump wanted to actually take over portions of Old San Juan that are actually low income districts in order to build a hotel chain there. And that was kind of thwarted by local efforts. And I wonder sometimes if that had some impact on his relationship to Puerto Rico during the hurricane and how the people there were treated in terms of, being actually laughed at by the president and having him throw a roll of paper towels for us to clean up our island after a 5.0 hurricane. And so I'm constantly aware that the law has had a big impact on the relationship of people to land, and that has an impact as well on health, and that oftentimes different efforts are made to benefit certain economic groups at the expense of low-income people with respect to land and or housing. The last example that I'll go through was an example of in Baltimore, after the UN had declared that oil-based paints were unsafe to have in housing because they were unhealthy to have around children in particular, the public housing in Baltimore elected with pressure from very wealthy families that were in the oil paint business. And some of these families we know through their beautiful museums that we have in our country that were demonstrations of beautiful oil-based paintings as well. But they ended up painting all the public housing in Baltimore using oil-based paints. And that has had a dramatic effect on the health of low-income people in those areas. And so for me, I see, and I had a brother who suffered from lead-based paint poisoning when he was a child, and I understand the effect on the brain development of children. And so I was really horrified to see that in many ways, this was done to economically advantage one group at the expense of another, and literally at the expense of their health. So through Ulu Ventures, which focuses on market-based approaches to try to address large problems in social and business and environmental areas, we actually make investments where we think there's scalable solutions to some of these kinds of issues.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I mean, I completely agree with your perspective that land use and our relationship to the land is so important. I mean, I feel that very strongly as a native Hawaiian. So thank you for sharing your perspective. I'll like to turn it over to Zara now, and she can share a little bit about her own journey and her own perspectives.
Thank you, Anu. One of the areas I'll be covering today in particular is the recent focus on data. The World Development Report for 2021 is entitled Data for Better Lives. And the report explores, the potential of data to change and improve lives of the poor, but also the possible negative repercussions and the roadblocks that exist. So much of the value of data out there today remains untapped, and the types of challenges we're facing are, misaligned incentives, incompatible data systems, and just a fundamental lack of trust. So a background as to what I do today is I work at a company called Planet. Planet is an aerospace startup, and we're capturing satellite imagery of the Earth's landmass every day. So these images are able to help us better inform how our Earth and our planet is changing. And the types of things that are related to the SDGs in particular, you think of, for example, SDG 2, Zero Hunger. You can use imagery to understand where and how crops are being grown, help farmers through digital apps, optimize their inputs, lower costs, improve yields. If you think about SDG number 6, clean water and sanitation, precision irrigation, SDG number 15, life on land, we just recently announced a big project with Norway's International Climate and Forest Initiative to help monitor deforestation and degradation all over the world. And a final one I'm really excited about is the SDG number 14, life below water. So we've been working with the Allen Coral Atlas Project to map the world's coral reefs. The common theme here, what I'm excited about my work at Planet is I get to be involved in a lot of these types of initiatives. We don't do that ourselves. We rely on these local partners. We rely on, as was just being discussed, the enabling environment, the legal framework, and the different social and economic contexts of the countries in which our data is being used. So what's really critical for our work and what keeps me excited is it's not just about the data we're producing from space with this constellation of nanosatellites capturing the Earth's imagery. It's what those final users are doing. It's about the types of questions they're asking. It's about whose hand the data falls in and what they ultimately decide to do with it. So much like the other panelists, I think that what I'm excited to contribute is what I've seen, what I've learned, and how we can hopefully use the data information that's out there for better, hopefully take into account a more holistic way of thinking about these solutions. There is no silver bullet, and there's definitely not one organization or one group of people who can solve this. So I think what I'm excited to do in my day-to-day work and talk about is how does work with new technologies and work with new information and data help drive decisions that can really make a big impact. Thank you, Anu.
Yes, thank you, Zara, for your perspective and your presentation. I'll finally turn it over to Magdalena to share a little bit about herself and her own story, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be in this panel. My work is a little bit different. I work at the university also. We're sort of a center that works on studying philanthropy and impact investing and sharing thoughts and moving people forward, the social leaders, to act in a more impactful way. So we give them tools and we make awareness on government, on to have a legal environment that promotes private funding for public good. And one of the things that really concerns us, we work in Chile and to Latin America with the environment on philanthropy is very different from the US. We have, of course, a long tradition of solidarity, but we lack of sort of a strategic view on philanthropy. So one of our concerns, and now having the 90% of the country in a lockdown, we're struggling with seeing that investors are having like moving to maximize short financial returns. Governments and philanthropists are also looking to attending immediate needs. And when we're talking about SDGs, we think that we need long-term or middle-term decision making. So I think that is struggling in these times. And what we are seeing is that we need not just a government having regulations and funding for things related to the SDG, environmental concerns, green energy, green finance, but we also need private investment to embrace the SDGs and to look for positive impact, really positive impact. So we're working on that. We work with other countries in the region, promoting this kind of role modeling. And one of the things that really moves is collaboration. So we are seeing that philanthropy, long-term strategic philanthropy, is a key seed funding for impactful entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship. Because what we see in the region is that impact investment has grown a lot, maybe slower than in Europe or in the US. And what the challenges that the UNDP was seeing recently in a new study is that one of the things we're lacking of is the development of investment-ready social entrepreneurship. So that's where the patient capital, risk tolerant capital that philanthropists can bring in can help this kind of new ideas with a market model and really social impact or environmental impact can grow and accelerate. So to impact investors to come in. So what are we seeing is that we see what I think is really interesting, some of consortium of philanthropists working in new blended models to move these challenges and in promoting public and private collaboration. The relationship with governments is always a challenge. Governments tend to look on low terms, like 4 years terms, and speak too much to voters. So we need this kind of actors, non-profit actors that can articulate and embrace really these social issues that Miriam was talking about. Who will be there when governments change, when impact or return doesn't come really in the short term to move faster. And one concern that I have learned today in this summit is that we really need to talk more about impactful technology, what Zara was mentioning. How do we use technology and with inclusion, which is a key issue in Latin America as well. Within now in the pandemic, half of the students are not able to connect to their online classes, but also to use technology in an impactful, positive, impactful way. So when I am very happy to have this conversation because 2030 is right behind the corner. So we have to move faster. I'm happy to have more questions and a dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All three of our panelists have walked us through really amazing presentations. And I think a big part of what I heard is just impact and how to drive impact in each of your line of work. So Miriam, Zara, Magdalena, how do each of you measure meaningful impact in your line of work? And I guess this is a dual question, but do you have any advice for aspiring change makers on how to foster a perspective of inclusion and innovation that will help drive forward that same type of impact as well?
I can take a first stab if you all would like. One of my favorite, I guess, philosophers, writers out there is Amartya Sen, and he writes "Development is Freedom." And one of his main messages is that the idea of impact really is whose life are you trying to improve and what is their definition of how they want to improve their life. So not to dodge your question, but to say, number one, I like to measure my impact on what was the value created for someone else in their terms. And what's really difficult is when it's so many different audiences, individuals, groups that you're working with, and they all are defining their own definition of success. It might be hard to benchmark across. So there's always that tension of how do you scale and do something across so many regions and measure your performance when you want to enable the groups that you're working with to have their own definition of success. So that's a little bit of a philosophical edge, but you see it actually coming up more and more. A group out of Oxford has recently published really interesting work about questioning our ideas of measuring impact by GDP, that kind of standard of how so many of the institutions today are thinking about our own economic well-being. And I think times like COVID have made us all reflect on, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? How has the environment, the world, our own personal communities been affected by all that's changed so drastically? So I'm going to pause there on my kind of setting the stage of where I'm going at with this is when I think of impact with what I'm doing at Planet today, which is, again, that data that has to go through those local partners and the legal frameworks and the social entrepreneurs we're working with, as both the other panelists here mentioned, Magdalena and Miriam, I would like to hope that it's not just about the intermediary, but it's about what is the impact we're trying to drive. So the types of measurements you can think of is it's not just, as a VC-backed startup, what our revenue is and that we're profitable and sustainable, but is our data being used to drive the actual outcome? For forestry, are there less trees being cut down? Are they being preserved in areas where they should be? Is there other areas of the world where that might be negatively impacting? Let's say one country's really, really doing a good job of protecting. There's that spillover. So you can't just see things in silos. You really have to be very self-critical of your impact, and positive impact one place can have kind of a domino effect somewhere else, and they fill in that gap. But I'd say the final thing I'd say to the people who today are thinking about their careers and who are thinking about what they want to do, define your own success, define how you want to measure yourself. For some people, it might be certain big achievements that can be demonstrated outside. Sometimes my little wins are just making sure that I'm helping those around me and having a direct impact in my small little circle. But I definitely would say it's important to have those stories and be connected for me. I like to see a direct link to the people I'm working with, and that drives the type of work I do. And being really honest with yourself. If you're comfortable having maybe a more scalable impact and working in larger organizations where you might miss that closer interaction, you can get a level removed. I could see direct engagement with entrepreneurs like Magdalena is doing is really powerful. Miriam's work at a large scale with legal frameworks. It's all different ways to have your own stamp. But I would just say define your own way and make sure that also you don't impose your view on others in just unconscious ways through how our companies and our countries measure themselves. That was a little bit of a philosophical start off, but I'd like to hand off to Magdalena and Miriam to also add upon that.
Okay. I think measuring impact is really important. I think we have so much decades on risk and return analysis, and we have companies, if finance has forgotten about impact in such a way that, as Miriam described, mining has had a lot of impact. We are a very mining company, as a lot of Latin American countries, and you see companies are now starting, and regulation is putting the impact view on companies, and investors are looking for measuring the impact. So one thing that is good about measuring is that you are aware of your effects, of the effects of your work. If you're not measuring, you are not aware of anything. You have a sense, maybe someone is grateful, and you tell your own stories. When you put some indicators and you have some objectives, you're able to look the positive effects, the negative effects, and to take care of that. And so that is something that I think it's really important for philanthropists to see if they are really creating value. Philanthropy is a world of a lot of egos and vanity. So you have to really address a problem. And for you're laughing, and
it just
and
sounds
as
like
well,
the private sector as well and government as
yes,
well,
of course.
to be
And
honest.
what about
The
politicians, you
humanity.
know? Yes, of course, everyone else. So I think it's important to really see some of the indicators, not get obsessed about this, but it's really important. And this is a world like sustainability. This is a world a lot of that is crossed by a lot of marketing as well. So we have a lot of greenwashing, social washing. And so it's really important for embracing it as from a strategic point of view. I think it's really important to have some measures, to have a benchmark, and to have the challenge is to have good tools around that. That is something that that is one of our challenges at the university, to provide those tools to the ecosystem. And one thing I want to say about, because I'm really involved now in a policy change discussion to promote philanthropy, I think it is important as well, not just impact or measuring impact, but evidence-based discussion. I think public policy are contaminated a lot with populism. So these simple big ideas or these terrible things that are going to happen, and we're lacking of more evidence-based and open dialogues, as Zara mentioned, but also evidence-based on the effects of things.
Thank you. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the ways in which we look to create impact through private sector action and the application of technology to some of these kinds of issues. And I'll focus today on the environment, but we also do educational technologies, and we select to invest in diverse teams also as a way of trying to address social issues in terms of who has access to capital and who is able to bring forth ideas in the market, because we believe that diverse teams will have life experiences that will lead them to see market opportunities that others that have traditionally been given venture capital access may not actually see. So in terms of some of our kind of pro-environment types of companies, we've focused on ones where I would say, carbon sequestration or reduction in emissions has typically been one of the key measurements, if you will. One of those was pasture map, which actually, Zara, your technology could also be helpful. Pasture map was a company that allowed ranchers to be able to photograph their land and be given better routes for actually managing the movement of their cattle. And that would help sequester carbon, because keeping the turf as healthy as possible actually helps sequester carbon. And if this kind of an impact could be done at a global level, which I believe with the kind of satellite technology, Zara, that you mentioned in that article is very possible, then you could have a tremendous impact on carbon sequestration in the whole world, just through better pasture management. And so that's an exciting technology that we help to invest in. And we've seen many other interesting examples. Blue River Technology was another company that applied computer vision into tractors, and through that use of computer vision, you could reduce the use of fertilizers by 90%. And that means that you're also getting a lot less fertilizers into the water table, right? And guess what? You were getting twice as much yield. So it was also very cost effective for ranchers to use this technology. And they reduce the cost of all that fertilizer, they reduce their environmental impact, and they make more money because they hopefully have better crop yields. And so that company was sold to John Deere, and in that way, it became more scalable. We would have liked them to stay private, become a really big company themselves, but sometimes the market demonstrates that for John Deere, this next generation tractor, they could get this deployed much more quickly because they have the sales forces all over the world to use it. So there can be some real environmental good that has some potential lower return to us, but it was still a great return, right? It was a 16x multiple, which on a financial basis is very strong for a venture-backed company. And so, you know, it was a win. And we've invested in companies that are electric bus companies, Proterra, which is going public now. So that's kind of taken it to the next level. And, you know, they're basically reducing emissions in communities. And like in the Southern California basin, a lot of cities in that area that have been so polluted are now going to go completely electric bus. And that helps the health of people, and in particular, lower income people live closer to these emissions typically. So there's an environmental justice component that happens with this private sector investment in creating a different kind of bus alternative for transportation systems. That's really exciting for us. So we always try to find this intersection between a really great for-profit sort of market return, and you can actually do something that has this hopefully public benefit in many different ways. And I think one of the things that is the most helpful is to have a mindset that this is really possible, that one does not have to sacrifice return in order to get really great market opportunities.
Thank you so much for all three of your excellent answers. This is such an interesting dialogue right now. We also had some questions from our audience members. We have one specifically from Miriam, and then I'll go back to a broader question. But for Miriam, what are some of the best applications of new technology that you have seen in your work? I know you talked about Proterra and Pasture Map, but any other specific techs that had the most impact in your opinion in your work in VC?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we're a generalist firm, so our impacts are various, and we don't specifically focus on one, but we, you know, I personally really love a lot of these environmental impacts that we can have through the for-profit sector. So, you know, another company that we've invested in is span.io, which will help create one of those new electric boxes that's in your basement that most people don't pay much attention to, but that manages the use of electricity in households. And that we think can help reduce people's use of energy much more effectively than if people have to go around and remember to do things. So we're hopeful that technology, you know, small improvements across such a vast, like if everybody has electricity in their house, but you change that box and you change what it can do and how it manages the use of electricity and how it turns off lights automatically, et cetera, like that small level at such a big scale really has the opportunity, I think, to have a tremendous environmental impact. But we do focus on, and I also want to talk a little bit about impact because I will say that I think this is such an important question about how do you measure impact. One of the things that is very difficult to do and to do well is to measure impact and to figure out when you do it and how you do it. And I am going to put in a plug for a colleague of mine. I'm going to try to find his paper on this particular topic about measuring impact, which is, you know, when we think about something like good dental health, we know that there are certain things that are associated with that. We know that, you know, teeth brushing, flossing, tongue scraping, you know, not having too many sugars. There's a lot of things that are associated with it. But if you had to try to measure everything before you put food in your mouth, you would probably starve. So you have to try to figure out what are the key variables that you're going to look at in order to measure your impact, and, you know, try to focus in on the particular impacts that are the most impactful, because ESG reporting can just become a nightmare of reporting without really a correlation to the impact. And a lot of the times people's behavior can only be driven by so many potential metrics to change their behavior. And so a lot of the ESG reporting, we don't think takes into consideration important psychological realities of how many variables people can actually hold in their head and be influenced by to change what they're doing. And hopefully technology also reduces just the need for people to think at all, but that can help implement better practices that without their effort actually does good all the time.
I wanted to add on your point, Miriam, if you think of the planet satellite data, the terabytes that we're downloading every day, it becomes analysis paralysis. I mean, you could have model upon model of every detail that you want to measure, every single plant species and everything. So I think to your point of trying to boil down to what matters most and how do we quantify that and how do we make sure it's an inclusive approach? Definitely a challenge we've had at Planet. I mean, the values of our imagery is that you alluded to it, like the broad coverage, being able to measure all over the time series. You can look back in time, forward in time, and look at change. But in the end, it's about who's that last user, what do they define? There's so much data out there. There's going to be more with companies like Blue River coming. There's so much information, and how do we really make sure we drive decisions and behavior without overburdening ourselves? Absolutely great point.
Yes, thank you for your answers. There's another question in the chat that says, do you feel separating social entrepreneurship from entrepreneurship could be more problematic for promoting sustainability in general? And I think even Magdalena, please feel free to join in, because even with philanthropy, you know, does this harm promoting sustainability because it's philanthropy and, you know, it's in this special category, right, as opposed to something just by itself?
It's a very good question, and I don't know if the answer is so simple. We would like to have investment without other nicknames, or just to talk about investment, all investment to be sustainable or impactful, and not to have a different category. But I think, and the thing here is that, at least in Latin America, when you go to investors to ask for an impact investment fund, or so they don't know which pocket to look at, the one with the on investments, on looking for return, or the one as a philanthropist, like to look for impact. And the challenge here is to find a common road here and to see these three variables integrated: return, risk, and impact together. So I think we're still in the road when you have to say we're looking intendedly to have a positive impact, and we're looking at a positive impact in this. I agree, Miriam, with these key issues. I don't know, health, electricity, or inclusion, or so we're going to measure that. The challenge for social entrepreneurs is that when investors hear that, or traditional investors hear this, is they say, oh, I will have to accept less return. And that is interesting when you have that kind of initiatives that are more impact first, and you need this seed capital that you can ask for philanthropists to assume more the risk. So we're seeing this venture philanthropy as a way of improving this seed funding that is very interesting. So entrepreneurs don't have enough time to prove the model, and the risk is to end up depending only on donations. But I think with technology, with entrepreneurial skills, you can have both, and you can go through the valley of death with the support of philanthropists. The thing is, we need, at least, and in Latin America more than maybe in the US or in Europe, we need a lot of role modeling, good cases, teaching, and data to move forward this. move forward, to have a stronger ecosystem that really shows, because we have a lot of challenge. And as Miriam said, we're connected. Chile is a good example of that. We're in the top 20 countries on high risk climate effects, though we are less carbon emission. We are on the 46, I think, and we have a strong commitment on carbon neutrality. And we're part of in that effect that is global. So it's very interesting to when you see that from a global perspective, you can have this one way build. But I think we're not still there. That is my sense.
Thank you, Magdalena. Does anyone else want to jump in? We have 4 more minutes in our panel, so if we all want to just go around and give closing thoughts for a few minutes, and we can move on to the next panel. But this has been such a riveting discussion between the 3 of you. So if anybody wants to take the lead and give their closing remarks.
Miriam, do you want to go? I saw you just go off mute. I'll go after you.
Okay, thank you. So I think for me, one of the exciting things about being a VC and, also being at this stage in my career where I see the end of my career is having the ability to really focus, as Zara has mentioned, in particular after this year, of really a deep reflection, because there's been so many there's just been so many impacts that I've seen about the leadership on the effect on so many human lives, and in particular the lives of poor and brown and Black people and Indigenous people. That I know for me, the work of integrating models from the for-profit sector with solutions that are focused on problems that are social or environmental, educational, legal problems. Like it's just such a, it's such a rich area to work in, where I think there's so many, very high returning opportunities for investment, that it feels we can really align against our approaches that have been so negatively impactful over so many years in the US and beyond. And so it is a time of real optimism for me to see this intersection between for-profit, not-for-profit, and government, and leadership, which I consider leadership in each of those sectors so important, because in working for the benefit of people and solving problems for people through technology and business and social issues as a source of inspiration for that activity, I just think we can do so much.
We have a minute for Zara and Magdalena if you would like to go.
Yeah, Miriam, you said something earlier. You said, we have to think it's possible. There was an optimism that I think it really resonates with my experience. I think sometimes when, especially working with some of the egos we talked about, or some of the politics, or some of these groups that are inevitably in every type of institution or organization we work with, if we do have that drive and that optimism, at the same time, you want to be realistic. You can't just be so optimistic. You're not recognizing the shortcomings and the risks, but there has to be that drive, I think. And if I were to say something to some of the people out there thinking about their career and going forward, that's key. Once you start losing that, it's really hard to go forward. But having that optimism, you mentioned the word leadership, making sure you're working in places where you really admire the leadership. Even if you're not at the top of the organization, it trickles down, it affects all different layers. So I would say definitely anywhere you spend time, you want to make sure that the people around you are people you admire. And it doesn't have to be in big just professional things. You want to admire their personal integrity because it'll come back to you. So you definitely want to see that in the environment you're around. And I would say, particularly our discussion about finding the answers, and it's not going to be obvious. If things are obvious, we would have solved it. There's been lots of smart people out there. It's very complicated. In fact, things are usually broken for a reason. Things usually don't work for a reason. Somebody's benefiting. So if you really want to do something impactful, if we've gone on a tangent talking about that, but it often requires somebody becoming uncomfortable, and you have to have that courage to step up. And often the person who can benefit the most is the one who's least empowered. So I would say have optimism, have courage, surround yourself with good people, and that will get you to be able to go much further than just maybe trying at it alone. So that would be my words of wisdom that I've heard from other mentors in my life.
Thank you so much, Zara. I'm so sorry we're out of time for this panel. Thank you so much to our speakers, Miriam, Magdalena, and Zara, for such a wonderful discussion and for sharing all of your perspectives. We appreciate you so much. Our next dialogue.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.